In the humid haze of a Roman summer, Dr. Elias Munro arrived in Vatican City with the weight of a mystery hanging over him, like the stone shadows of the Apostolic Palace. An Oxford historian, an expert in early Christian texts, Munro had received a message encoded in Latin and Aramaic, posted anonymously to his private P.O. box in London. It was a single-page parchment. By the smell and texture, and it referenced something called Codex Tenebris, the Codex of Darkness. He wasn't supposed to be here. Officially, he was consulting with the Vatican Library on Gnostic Gospels, but in truth, Munro was searching for something long thought to be legenda, secret collection of documents hidden beneath the Vatican itself, curated and preserved by a secret order only whispered about Custodes Umbri, the Shadow Keepers. Legend had it that the Codex Tenebris contained writings that predated the Old Testament accounts of a pre-human civilization that had contact with entities from the stars. The Catholic Church, it was said, had suppressed these writings for centuries, guarding them within the deepest levels of the Vatican's secret archives, where access was limited to only the highest levels of the Curia and members of this elusive brotherhood. Munro's contact, a Jesuit scholar named Father Lorenzo de Luca, was one of the few who believed the stories were more than apocrypha. They met in the sacristy of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, under the guise of a routine theological exchange. There, in whispers behind a marble column, De Luca handed Munro a worn leather journal that belonged to a priest who vanished in 1917. Inside were accounts of catacombs, beneath the catacombs levels, not found on any map, sealed behind doors that required biometric access, or something far older. Relics. There is something down there, De Luca had said, his eyes trembling. Something not meant for men. Not anymore. Munro didn't know if it was the air, the weight of centuries, or the fear in the priest's voice that made his spine stiffen. But he knew one thing. He had to get beneath St. Peter's Basilica. That night, Munro made his way past the Swiss Guard checkpoint, using borrowed credentials and a security pass smuggled from De Luca. He entered the Vatican necropolis, the ancient burial site beneath the Basilica, and followed De Luca's instructions to a crypt marked by a black cross etched into the stone. Mark unlisted in any church records. Behind the tomb was a false wall, and behind that, stairs descending into blackness. The descent was slow, his flashlight slicing through centuries of dust and decay. Strange markings lined the walls, symbols not Latin, not Greek, but almost Sumerian, with an alien twist that set his nerves alight. At the bottom, the stairs ended at a door made of something that looked like obsidian, set with a handprint, carved in gold. He placed his hand in the print. The door opened. The room beyond wasn't like the rest of the catacombs. It was smooth, precise. The stone was darker, colder. It was clear this place had not been built by the same hands that built the Basilica, or the city above it. And there it was. The Codex Tenebris, sealed in a glass case, suspended by what looked like magnetic force, glowing faintly with an inner light. Munro approached, reaching out to touch the glass, but the moment he did, his head filled with sound, not noise, voices, chanting in a language he didn't recognize. The walls trembled, lights flickered, and from behind him, a whisper, "You should not be here, Dr. Munro." He turned. A figure in a dark red robe stood there, face obscured by a hood. "You have opened a door that should have remained closed." But Munro's eyes were already locked on the Codex, and somewhere, deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The hooded figure moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who had waited centuries to be awakened. His voice echoed in the ancient chamber, as though the stones themselves remembered it. Munro froze, heart pounding, eyes darting between the Codex and the robed man now stepping into the faint, pulsating glow. "I didn't come to steal it," Munro said, his voice shaking. "I came to understand." "No one understands the Codex," the figure replied. "Not fully. not without giving something in return. Monroe backed away from the relic, raising his hands cautiously. Who are you? The man removed his hood was old, very old, yet his face was preserved with an unnatural vitality, like skin sculpted in wax. His eyes were silver, not gray, not blue, but a true, reflective silver, shimmering like mercury in candlelight. I am Custos Primus, first keeper of the order. We are the Custodes Umbri, he said, guardians of what lies beneath. The name jolted Monroe. You're real, ... As real as the codex you nearly awakened, Custos said, gesturing toward the suspended tome. It is a living document. It does not contain knowledge, is knowledge. It thinks, it adapts, and it remembers. Monroe took a breath. Remembers what? Before the garden, Custos replied. Before the flood, before man was man. There were others. The codex is the last record of their time here. He circled Monroe, the folds of his robe whispering against the polished stone floor. They were not gods. But to the early people, they might as well have been. Monroe's mouth was dry. Aliens? No, Custos said. Not as you understand them. Not travelers from the stars, but from somewhere else. Another fold in the veil. He pointed upward. The church above was built to keep people looking to the heavens. But the real danger was always below. Monroe stared at the codex, still suspended in its glowing chamber. Why hide it? Because truth is a poison when delivered to the unready. Because knowledge without wisdom burns more than it illuminates, Custos said. Because men kill for lesser secrets. He reached into his robe and removed a small object wrapped in black cloth. When he unwrapped it, Monroe gasped. It was a medallion, circular, etched with the same non-human script he'd seen on the walls. In its center, a single human eye carved from obsidian, encircled by 7 hands. This is your invitation, Dr. Monroe, Custos said. You are not the first to descend seeking truth, but you may yet survive it. Monroe hesitated. And if I say no, then you forget everything you've seen. You go back to Oxford, back to lectures and theories and the safe walls of academia, and we seal this chamber again for another 100 years. But Monroe couldn't look away from the codex. Its pages, though he had not touched them, called to him. It was not curiosity he felt, but something deeper, something older, a pull at the base of his spine, a whisper at the edge of thought. What does the codex want? Monroe asked. Custos Primus's expression did not change. It wants to be read. That night, Monroe was blindfolded and led through corridors beneath the Vatican that not even the Swiss Guard knew existed. Carved not by chisel, but melted with precision centuries ahead of its time. These tunnels twisted in mathematically perfect spirals, descending into chambers that defied geometry. They passed rooms filled with relics unlike anything Monroe had ever seen. Metal spheres hovering silently, tablets etched in languages he could not begin to place, and glass jars holding organic matter that pulsed softly in the dark. Finally, they entered the Sanctum Umbri, the heart of the order. It was a circular room, its domed ceiling painted, with scenes not from the Bible, but from something else. Winged beings, with faces of fire descending upon early human settlements, not as angels, but as watchers. Genetic diagrams intertwined with ancient runes, stars exploding in patterns that mirrored constellations never seen from Earth. The other keepers were already waiting. 12 of them, men and women of various ages and races, wearing robes of black and red, their faces lit by the glow of a central altar, a massive orb, rotating slowly, showing scenes from Earth across different ages. You are now initiated, Custos said, and your first task is not to read the codex, but to prepare. Prepare for what? Monroe asked. Custos looked around the chamber, then back at him. For what comes next? The codex showed us a cycle, a clock ticking not in centuries, but in epochs. He raised a hand. The orb zoomed in on Antarctica. Something has awakened at the southern pole, A structure. Pre-human. Older than the ice. Monroe frowned. You think it's connected? Custos didn't reply with words. Instead, he reached into his robe again and produced a scroll. When he unrolled it, Monroe's breath caught in his throat. It was a prophecy, written in Aramaic, Sumerian, and a third, inhuman language. It read, "When the ice splits and the star-child sings, the keepers must decide, open the gate, or seal the world." The chamber fell into silence. Monroe realized the codex wasn't just a record of the past, it was a warning. The private Vatican jet touched down at McMurdo Station in Antarctica under heavy diplomatic clearance. Monroe disembarked wearing triple thermal layers, but still felt the sting of a cold unlike anything he had ever experienced. Sharp, unrelenting, ancient. He was joined by two Custodes Umbri operatives, Sister Amara, an Ethiopian linguist and combat medic who hadn't spoken more than 10 words since Rome, and Father Alejandro Ruiz, an ex-archaeologist who had once vanished for 3 years into the Libyan desert and returned, with no explanation, only scars and a tattoo of the same non-human script etched into the codex. They were headed to what was known only as Site 17, off-grid facility maintained jointly by the Vatican and an undisclosed private aerospace firm that had been, for decades, quietly acquiring land in Antarctica through shell corporations. Monroe hadn't known such a partnership existed. Most people didn't. That's how the order worked. The interior of the facility was clinical and metallic, humming with silent energy. Monroe saw equipment not yet available to the public: energy scanners, magnetic resonance imagers, and AI linguistic analyzers tuned to recognize ancient scripts. But none of it prepared him for what he saw through the reinforced observation window. A chamber excavated directly from the ice, nearly a kilometer in diameter. At its center stood a monolithic black structure, perfectly smooth, rising at least 70 meters into the air. It was shaped like a tuning fork, vibrating faintly, and covered in carvings that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. No snow settled on it. No frost touched its surface. It rejected the world. "That's the gate," Father Ruiz said beside him, voice grim. Monroe tore his eyes from the structure. "Gate to what?" Ruiz looked at him. "We don't know, but we've seen it before." In the facility's restricted archive, Ruiz showed Monroe a collection of hand-bound tomes stored behind a biometric vault. They were written in a language only partially deciphered us in the codex. Tenebris as a Rosetta Stone, and these documents were collectively known as the Blood Archive, named so because every page was inscribed not with ink, but with blood, ancient, preserved, unidentifiable by any known species. Monroe examined a page under magnification. The script was simultaneously beautiful and horrifying. Each line was composed of thousands of interlaced microglyphs that shimmered under infrared light, revealing layers of meaning. Some described astronomical phenomena, black holes, solar cycles, planetary drift, but others were narrative, prophetic, and disturbingly accurate. One fragment, translated crudely into Latin centuries ago, read, "In the cold lands, where light forgets the soil, the sleeping tongue shall hum once more, and the codex shall remember its name." "This structure is the tongue," Sister Amara said, finally speaking. "It's not a building, it's a being, or the remains of one." Monroe blinked. "You're saying it's alive?" "No," Ruiz said, "we're saying it was. And something is waking it up." The following day, Monroe joined the field team in descending into the monolith. It had taken months to drill an access shaft into its base. Even now, no tools could penetrate its walls, only the central corridor, which opened on its own 3 days before Monroe's arrival. It was as though the structure had been waiting for him. Inside, the walls pulsed faintly, like the inside of a lung. The team was quiet, reverent. One scientist murmured prayers in Coptic, another wept without understanding why. Monroe felt it too, that this place was not just alien in form, but wrong in function. Every instinct screamed that he was inside something that should not exist. They reached what they believed to be the core. At the center stood a plinth, and above it, floating unsupported, was a sphere of liquid obsidians, similar to the Vatican's altar orb, but vastly more complex. As Monroe approached, it reacted. The sphere split into swirling fragments and reassembled into a projection, a holographic map of Earth. But it wasn't the Earth they knew. It was Earth as it had once been, long before human civilization, before the continent split. Pangaea. Then the map changed. It shifted forward. Cities appeared. Not human cities. The architecture was impossible spirals, vertical mazes, floating constructs, and then fire, collapse, silence. The final image showed a sigil identical to the medallion Custos had given Monroe. Then the lights died. A vibration shook the entire facility. Lights blinked red. Klaxon screamed. The monolith was broadcasting something in the control room. Radio spectrometers showed a signal complex, multi-layered, unlike any known transmission. But it wasn't broadcasting out. It was broadcasting down into the Earth. It's calling to something beneath the crust, Ruiz whispered. Something we never knew was there. That night, Monroe reviewed the translated prophecies. One passage stood out, newly interpreted by the AI linguist. When the tomb awakens, the seed beneath shall stir, and the codex shall no longer speak for, it shall sing. What does that mean? Monroe asked. Amara's eyes were grim. It means we've triggered a failsafe. The codex is not just a record, it's a voice. And now something is listening. Back in his quarters. Monroe heard it. A hum, low, subliminal, vibrating through bone. It wasn't coming from the monolith. It was coming from the code, X, thousands of kilometers away. Locked in the Vatican's deepest vault, the Codex Tenebris had awakened, and it was starting to sing. The signal intensified. Across the globe, seismographs began registering harmonic tremors, waves of vibration that weren't earthquakes, but something else. Something measured, intentional. The Vatican issued quiet denials to international agencies that suspected subterranean nuclear testing, but internally, the Custodes Umbri knew the truth. The monolith in Antarctica had awakened something ancient, and it was responding in kind. Monroe stood in the observation chamber of Site 17, watching, as the obsidian structure vibrated ever so slightly, its surface rippling like black water frozen in time. Lights danced across its surface in rhythmic pulses, patterns that matched the vocal spectrums found encoded in the Codex Tenebris. Monroe hadn't slept in days. He hadn't needed to. The song had taken hold of him. At first it came as a low hum behind his thoughts. Then, at night, it filled his dreams. Whispered syllables in a language that felt like remembering, not learning remembering. And the moment he started humming it aloud, things began to change. Around him, equipment malfunctioned, lights flickered, time felt inconsistent. Conversations fractured in mid-sentence. Even the other operatives began behaving strangely, some withdrawing into trance-like states, others vanishing into the ice. Pulled toward the monolith, like moths to a flame. Father Ruiz was the first to snap. He carved symbols from the codex into the walls of his chamber using his own fingernails, repeating a phrase over and over again. The choir is coming. The choir is coming. Then he bit off his own tongue and choked to death. Monroe saw it happen. And yet, when he tried to replay the footage later, the cameras had recorded only static. The codex was rewriting perception. Back in the Sanctum Umbri, beneath the Vatican, Custos Primus watched the events unfold through the orb. The gate had been opened. But worse, the codex had chosen a vessel, Monroe. That hadn't happened since 1432, during the Black Death, when another vessel, a woman named Isolde de Marie, had gone mad and burned down half of Avignon, after speaking the song aloud. This time, The song wasn't just auditory, it was dimensional. It altered the fabric of reality in a subtle but compounding way, rewriting neural pathways. Monroe's brain scans were already showing activity in regions dormant in normal humans' fractalized growths forming behind the frontal cortex, mimicking antennae. "The choir has heard him," Custos whispered to the other keepers, "and they are answering." In the ice field, 2 kilometers from the monolith, a fissure opened, not a natural crack, but a perfect geometric line, a hexagonal spiral deep enough to vanish from satellite view. What emerged wasn't a being, it was a frequency, a sound, that warped the snow, crushed equipment, and shattered bone without touching skin. The choir didn't speak. It resonated. Researchers exposed to the sound went catatonic, their eyes turning pitch black, their tongues bloated, whispering in unison. "We were beneath you, always." The bodies were taken to the containment chamber, but within hours, they had vanished, molecularly dissolved, as though they had never existed. Sister Amara found Monroe standing barefoot on the ice, eyes closed, whispering in time with the vibrations. "You're not just hearing it anymore," she said. "You're translating it." Monroe opened his eyes slowly. They were silver. "It's not a song, it's a memory, a record of when they tried this before." "Tried what?" "Ascension, or what they thought it was. But we weren't ready." He turned to her. "But now, maybe we are." The Custodes Umbri gathered an emergency conclave. The orb showed tremors from 6 other global points each, located near the Earth's magnetic poles. All dormant structures. All now humming. The choir wasn't local. It was planetary, and as they activated, they synchronized in London. The subway tunnels beneath Aldwych Station collapsed, revealing stone structures bearing the same sigils as the Codex. In the Gobi Desert, a sandstorm revealed a buried city with spires carved from black crystal, glowing faintly in the night. In the depths of the Mariana Trench, a research submersible caught a brief glimpse of a spiral tower rising from the ocean floor before losing all contact. Each location matched a glyph in the Codex. Each was awakening at Site 17. Monroe began the ritual, not because he was instructed, but because the Codex sang through him now. Its syllables were alive in his bloodstream, his breath, his very thoughts. The blood archive had hinted at it, but never fully explained what it meant for a vessel to speak the Codex aloud. It wasn't language, it was activation. Standing at the base of the monolith, surrounded by infrared drones and terrified operatives, Monroe lifted the medallion of the 7 hands and began to recite the Song of the Deep. The monolith responded. It unfurled the structure, bloomed like an impossible flower, revealing an interior chamber that shimmered like oil on water. Inside were forms humanoid, but wrong, elongated, with faces blurred by something that wasn't motion, but the refusal of the universe to define them, frozen in place, or maybe held. "Choir members," Amara whispered, recording everything, but then the sound changed. From the depths of the earth, it rose a dissonant harmony, layered with pain and promise. The very air rippled. The snow outside melted in concentric circles. The choir wasn't just waking up, they were returning, and in Monroe's mind, one final line of the Codex rang out, clear and absolute. "When the vessel sings, the sky shall fracture, and what lies beneath shall no longer be bound." The sky cracked at 4:16 UTC. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Across the upper stratosphere, satellites registered a distortion previously thought impossible outside of theoretical physics. A thin, translucent fissure appeared above the southern hemisphere, stretching from the edge of Antarctica to the middle of the South Pacific like a jagged scar of light. No aurora, no ion storm, just silent sand fracture. In Rome, the Pope himself was taken underground by Swiss guard units under direct orders from the Custodes Umbri. The Church could not explain this. No institution could. But the order had prepared for this possibility since the first Codex fragment surfaced in the 4th century beneath. The Ruins of Babylon, at Site 17. Monroe was no longer Monroe. He stood at the threshold of the opened monolith, his skin covered in sigils that pulsed like living circuitry, his voice chanting words no human language had ever contained. His eyes were twin silver discs, and when he looked at Amara, she felt seen in a way that bypassed language. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't even afraid. He was becoming. The choir is not what we thought, he told her, his voice layered plural. They are not here to conquer. They are here to finish what they started. What did they start? She whispered. Monroe looked upward, toward the shattering heavens. Us. The blood archive had always been incomplete. Even the keepers knew this. Their translations, though painstaking, were based on fragments shadows of a larger truth. But now the codex was fully active. It began to fill in the missing verses. Entire stanzas of pre-human history unfolded, not as text, but as experience. Amara, granted temporary access by Monroe, stood inside the codex's projection chamber as visions overwhelmed her. She saw Earth before humanity, jungles the size of continents, oceans that shimmered with bioluminescent life, and skyborne cities made not of stone, but sound and gravity. The beings who ruled then were not gods. They were composers, engineers of resonance, creators of life through harmonic manipulation. The choir. They didn't just seed the earth, they tuned it. Frequencies embedded in rock, DNA, even consciousness itself. But something had gone wrong. The first humans, early primates, modified by exposure to the choir's resonant experiments, developed independent will, self-awareness, the ability to disrupt harmony, and so the choir silenced themselves, not out of mercy, but out of necessity. We were not abandoned. The codex spoke through Monroe. We were quarantined. The fissure in the sky grew wider. Across the world, people began to hear the hum-a-low, unceasing tone that triggered migraines, hallucinations, and in some cases, spontaneous memories of lives they had never lived. A child in Cairo drew the entire harmonic alphabet of the choir in chalk before falling unconscious. A woman in Sao Paulo spoke fluent Sumerian for 4 minutes, and then died of massive neural overload. And above them all, in the upper atmosphere, something began to push through the fracture. A shape, colossal, folding in and out of visible space. Not a ship, not a creature, but something in between, a structure, woven of light and sound and will. The choir was not returning as individuals. They were returning as a state of being. In the control room, instruments went dead, electrical fields reversed. People began to sing involuntarily, matching the frequency of the codex. It wasn't hypnosis, it was resonance. The choir was aligning every mind on earth, and then Monroe spoke the final verse. Let the vessels sing, let the flesh remember, let the sky break, and the song begin again. The monolith split vertically. Inside, a staircase descended not into the earth, but into somewhere else. The geometry made no sense. It was recursive, fractal, like a spiral folding in on itself in 11 dimensions. I have to go, Monroe said. Amara grabbed his arm. You'll die. No, he said. I'll finish. He stepped into the fracture and vanished. 1 week later, the skies closed. The fissure sealed like a wound. No choir emerged. No invasion followed. The monolith collapsed into dust. The codex, locked inside the Vatican's deepest vault, turned blank, every page wiped clean, and Monroe was gone. But the world had changed. Children across the globe were being born with strange neural patterns, fractal structures. In their prefrontal cortex, musicians began composing melodies they had never learned, yet all shared the same underlying structure. Scientists reported discoveries that came in dreams, perfectly complete. And a new symbol appeared on cave walls, in deserts, in subway tunnels. The sigil of the codex, the 7 hands, in a sealed chamber beneath Vatican City. Custos Primus recorded the final entry in the Black Gospela, companion to the codex, documenting human interaction with the choir. He wrote, "The choir did not conquer us, nor did they save us. They remembered us. And now, so do we. This is not the end of the world. This is its next verse."